with the Austin City skyline. Most people, including myself, actually early on, I actually thought they filmed this thing outdoors. You know, you remember those shots where they would go through like ferns, you know, going into the some of the opening shots there. But it's actually done here in the Studio 6A. And it's hard to tell from this picture here, but there's actually a catwalk that's above the stage there. It goes all the way around the room. And this is where most of, well, all these tapes actually lived for the last, you know, 3 or 4 decades. And, you know, it's actually a really large ceiling. And, you know, the higher you go, the more heat there is up there. So, you know, the joke is that these tapes have been baking for the last 40 years, which we'll show you that a little bit later on. Another fun fact about 6A too, with the high ceilings, Austin's known for its bats. If you guys have ever been there, bats come out of the thing. And so I've done maybe 5 or 6 episodes now where there's bats attacking people in the middle of the show, and so they have to stop everything and clear it all out. So it's a lot of fun. So this is David Huff. David, I wanted to include a picture of him. David's actually been there since season 1. He's the audio engineer for ACL. If you've ever seen an episode on Austin City Limits, he's most certainly the person who's recording. And he's such an incredible person, nice guy. He's actually there working tonight on a show, so he's been there for, 50 years. And he's only missed 2 or 3 episodes in that 50 years. So he's put in a lot of work, and he knows an exorbitant amount of history of the you know, technical history, history of the artists. He's got lots of stories of all the artists that have been through there. He's a great dude. He actually gave me the tour around the facilities. This is the original studio at 6A. This is where they recorded everything in the back room there. It's just right up the stairs. You'll see that's the Euphonics digital console, System 5 digital console that they put in, I think around season 8, that replaced their Neve, what was it? It was a 32 channel Neve that they had in there before. Of course, the A80 is in the back. That's the 16 channel A80 that they use for a good number of the seasons, and then the ATR 104 next to that, which is the 4-track machine. And what they did, that was their stereo masters. So what they did is channels 1 and 2 was left and right, channel 3 was the guard band, and channel 4 was the time code. So that's what they would actually sync to the actual live broadcast. And off this picture is the Studer 820 24-track is what they used on the later seasons. So in 2011, ACL moved from the University of Texas campus to the Moody Theater in downtown Austin. And if you haven't been to Austin or if you're ever in the area, I definitely recommend you go check out the Moody Theater. They have shows there all the time. It's not just like ACL tapings. They have just live events almost daily, and it's a really cool venue. I've been there a couple times to see some shows, and it's a lot of fun. The capacity in Studio 6A was about 300 people. It's about 300. And then the Moody Theater is almost 3,000. It's like 2,700 people. So it's definitely a bigger theater, but they designed it purposely for Austin City Limits, so they still kind of kept that small-time feel, you know. There we go. So the history of Austin City Limits, the pilot aired in 1974. Of course, Willie Nelson was the first one. And essentially, in this collection, nothing was preserved from season 1 and season 2. They actually reused those tapes. You know, it was a PBS station. They had limited budget, so there was a children's television show. Is this showing up right? Yes, it is. There was a children's television show called Caris Corendus. Caris Corendus. Yeah, that was that they ended up reusing some of these tapes for. And actually, it was the first bilingual television show, that was ever done. So, unfortunately, nothing from season 1 and 2 was saved. They ended up reusing those tapes again for season 3, and actually partially in season 4. So, as you get to the end of those recordings in season 3, some of the older recordings from season 1 and 2 just appear out of nowhere, and so they're still kind of there. There's, a little bit of stuff at the ends or beginnings of the tape, but not enough to actually create a show. Then of course, it's lots of tape. We've got 24-track, 16-track, most everything was done at 15 IPS. and later they used Dolby SR for some of the 24-track stuff. And yeah, so it's enough analog tape to go from Austin to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, all the way back to Austin with a lot of room to spare. So it's a lot of tape. So in season 1, or 1 through 4, yeah, it was all mono. They just recorded directly to quad videotape, and they aired it right from the quads. We actually digitized the video collection several years ago, and so now we're just working on the audio portion of it. In season 5, 1980, they actually introduced stereo recording. These were done on the Studer, the ATR 104 that was in there. And it wasn't adopted fully though until season 9, 1984, and that's when they went to 1-inch. And so they ended up mixing everything down to 1-inch. And what's crazy about the ATR 104 stuff, they actually sync that in real time. Like as they were airing it on TV, they were syncing it in real time. You know, I guess that was normal for the broadcast stuff back then, but it just seems like a lot could go wrong during the live broadcast. So now that all those pallets actually live at my studio in Atlanta at Preserve South, and you know, it's a lot of tape, so it takes up quite a bit of storage in our facility, and this is part of our cold storage. And every time I walk through this collection, I find tapes that I actually haven't seen yet, and I just get excited, you know, whenever I see a lot of these tapes. So Austin City Limits has spanned, you know, four decades, and so they've had a lot of people through the years. You know, Ralph Stanley and Nora Jones. It's a pretty amazing collection. There's 5 boxes of Cash, Johnny Cash, and of course Lyle Lovett down there at the end. So it's a lot of fun stuff. I still see tapes that I actually haven't seen yet. These are among the first tapes that from season 3. These were the original season 1 and 2 tapes that they had ended up reusing. And somehow these ended up in quad boxes or quad cases. I guess, you know, over all the transfers over the year, or reuse over the year, they've found their way out of their original boxes and into these quad things. That's actually John Prine right there. That's his first recording, which season 3, it was an amazing episode. So the media formulas that they included, it spanned, you know, several decades. So they went through a lot of different tape. They would buy it sometimes in bulk. They would buy it sometimes, you know, 10 tapes at a time, whatever they could afford as a PBS station. And essentially most of it is Ampex 456. But it's there's other ones in there. Of course, they started with the 30-minute reels, the 10.5-inch reels, and then later went into the 14-inch reels because they could record a full hour on at 15 IPS. So if you think about a taping, you know, an artist would come on and do you know, a 2-hour show essentially. The taping lasts for about 2 hours, depending on the artist or what, you know, how much material they have. So they would have to stop and change tape, and they do a little more, and then they would stop again and change tape. So there's a lot of tape changes through the process. So maybe, you know, for a single artist, they could have 4 or 5 different reels, and out of that 2 hours that they recorded, only, you know, 30 minutes would actually make it to the show. So you know, there's a lot of unheard music that I get to hear when I'm working on this. Of course, you know, even though it's a live show, because they do have the opportunity to stop, and, you know, they can redo songs sometimes, which happen quite often. With the 1-hour reels, they didn't have to do it as much. So in addition to the 2-inch audio tape, they did a lot of DATs and ECMs. The DATs, there's several hundred DAT tapes that were stereo masters, mostly backups, although they did use the DATs for some of the broadcasts later on. These DTRS tapes, there's several hundred of these, and these were mostly also backups of the 2-inch tape, but sometimes on some of the later seasons, they would use the 2-inch tape, like 1 through 24, and they would use these in addition to the 2-inch. So the DTRS would be, you know, tracks 25 through 48, I know Allman Brothers was one of them that had 1,000 tracks that they had to, that they wanted to use. And there's several artists that did that. So when David Huff gave me a tour of the studio, I noticed this box over in the corner in the studio there, and I was asking David, what in the world is this? Because it had this hairdryer that was attached to it, and so he got really excited. He really wanted to show this to me. So as it turns out, David used this to bake his tapes for the last 20 to 30 years. And it's so scrappy and I love it. So he like perfected this device, and he really has had this box. There, a lot of the New West records or New West releases that they've done like live from Austin kind of thing. Some of you have heard those. All of those tapes were done in this box. So Waylon Jennings, Jerry Lee Lewis, Johnny Cash, Dolly Parton. So this box has been around for a while. He's noticed the little stick down at the bottom. That was to allow the airflow to actually come out of the box. And he had actually his recipe on the top of the box here was actually pretty close. It's pretty close to what we're doing still now. 120 to 140. That's pretty accurate. And then of course how to adjust the air gap in there. I'm surprised he didn't burn the place down with this. Yeah. So our baking process is generally the same, although it's a little more technologically advanced, I guess. 54 degrees Celsius, 129 degrees. So depending on the flavor of the tape, what condition that's stored in, it's about 3 to 14 days. That's usually, 7 days, 10 days. It just really depends on the condition of the tape. I usually use about between like 10 and 14 ovens, depending on what else we have going on in the studio. But let's see. So with the ovens, I try not to go half mass in the actual ovens themselves. When you start doing a lot of 2-inch tape, we want to get as much airflow through the whole oven as possible. It's pretty important. It's even more important when we're working on the 14-inch reels, the bigger ones. This picture doesn't really do it justice, but these reels are big, right? It's a lot of mass. The windows that are on the front of these flanges here, for some reason, they're actually smaller on the 14-inch reels than they are on the 10.5-inch reels. They're only like an inch and a half big on each side. So, that doesn't necessarily promote the best airflow over the tape pack. So I actually remove all the flanges very carefully before I put them in the oven, so we get as much kind of convection as possible. So right off the bat, when we started opening boxes, this was like the first thing that we see. Ampex had these guard bands, the white guard bands with the Velcro on it. And it doesn't matter how careful you are of trying to take these things off, the Velcro almost always just gets obliterated when you're taking these guard bands off. And of course that glue just kind of goes everywhere. A lot of times they fall apart in the box even before we've even gotten in there. And of course all this stuff, adhesive and glue and stuff, it really just does get everywhere. All this has to be cleaned before we actually bake the tape. I've never baked it with any of the stuff on it, but I presume that it would destroy the tape. And this isn't part of the ACL collection, but it's a good example of how these guard bands fail inside the box. They're being moved around a lot. And what people did is that instead of using like hold down tape on the actual media itself, they would just use these guard bands instead. And they would eventually fail, and then you have tape just kind of unraveling in the box. So I've opened up a lot of boxes of tape that just have tape hanging out everywhere, and it's actually pretty common. So we talked about, let's try to re-glue this, the Velcro, let's try to clean it off. Like, we really, try to come up with a solution for these things. And ultimately we decided, let's just get rid of them. It's not, generally it's not serving a good purpose for us. There's even an argument that they may trap in moisture inside of the reels because there's no, they can't really breathe. And it was just too much. They just decided, let's just not use them again. So in addition to that, we get, because we're working with a lot of old tape stock and we have defects are actually pretty common. These were actually, they came like that. course, this one was Mark. David must have saw this during the mixing process. It was still recorded, so I mean, you know, any tracks that have issues, like audible issues, it's just, the damage has already been done. It's just, you know, he tried to maybe mark these as he was mixing them. You know, more chemical stuff. I've heard stories of some folks that worked in the Ampex factory in Alabama, where, you know, they had like lead paint on the ceilings and stuff, and some, you know, the stuff was so toxic when they were creating the tape that, you know, there was like drips coming down off of the ceiling that were going into the vats of, you know, the tape that they were making. So, you know, there's no telling what kind of defects are actually in there. This was an original splice. I don't know if I've ever seen one of these before. This is a manufacturer's splice. Maybe y'all have seen one before on tape. This is not something that David did. It's almost like a rubbery, it's like electrical tape almost. But it was in fact done in the manufacturing process. So it's one of those things where you get to this point, you make a wish because you'll never see it again. And then of course you know, these were pretty common as well. The grease pens and things like that. All this stuff has to be cleaned off before we actually you know, digitize these things. So, and these are actually, it's a very common problem. So the AGFA, this was one of the short-lived tapes in the collection, the AGFA PEM 468. This tape, actually I haven't even opened this up yet. This is the original hold-down tape that actually came in the boxes. You can see that 30 years ago, when David had pulled this thing off, when David had pulled it off to record the stuff, he pulled off the back coating right along with it. So even before I get into working with it, you can tell that the damage, it's a really fragile tape. You can take your finger and just rub it right on the surface of the tape and it'll just scrape right off. So this was one of the, I think they realized that early on. This only lasted not even half a season when they stopped using it. That was Ralph Stanley, by the way. Ralph Stanley reel, which is also an incredible show. The most ubiquitous problem, though, by far, is some of the corrosion damage that we see on a lot of these big 2-inch. And, you know, there's lots of speculation on what causes this. My theory, even though I have absolutely no science behind this, is that typically it's, I see the problem starting or originating from the rubber hub sleeves. They had these rubber sleeves that would go over the center hub. And just like, you know, pinch rollers did on old tape machines that weren't used for a while, the rubber would essentially just break down and, you know, eventually just melt right off the machine, right? So I think there's actually some type of chemical reaction happening where this oil is being exuded from these rubber hubs, and you'll see the flanges are not always machined the best way, like really smooth, and so it gets in there and just causes some type of chemical reaction. Of course, this is one of the flanges that's damaged. This is actually really common. I see this on, you know, a good number of reels that I do. That's nothing that you can wipe off. It's actually etched into the metal, where it's just like eating the metal and it causes this chemical process. Again, these flanges, the machining was really rough on a lot of these, especially the original Ampex, like that rainbow Ampex that you see. And those issues directly translate onto the tape pad. So it's kind of, we're always chasing these things down. You see these fingerprints, kind of hard to see here, but there's fingerprints from the original manufacturing process that they just didn't wipe off, or just, you know, handling damage. And those immediately corroded. You can see the spots there on the flanges, which again translates directly onto the tape pad. So this was actually a Willie Nelson master from season 4, and it took me a whole day to clean this one. You can see even like the about an inch from the hub there, it really eats into the tape if you leave it long enough, and it causes this kind of pinning effect on the outsides of the tape, where, you know, tracks 1 and 2 and tracks 23, 24, depending on what your configuration is. You get a lot of audible issues that go along with it. Of course, time code is down to 24 or track 16, depending on what it is. And you may have like syncing issues, just all types of stuff. Luckily, they didn't use track 1 for, they used it mostly for bass guitar on these tapes, and which was helpful because the issues weren't as prevalent as if you were using vocal track, for instance. So we decided, because there's all these issues, of course we clean all these spindles and everything, it's a lot of work, we decided let's just take these things off. They're obviously, they're going to keep decomposing. They're going to cause more issues. Let's just take them off. When you actually wind the tape on the 2-inch, it winds just as fine. We've even done tests where we bake the tape again, just to see if it's going to cause slippage or anything. And it doesn't. It actually works pretty well. So this is, now I have a lot of these. I'll probably start a vacuum cleaner belt company after this. So for the digitization process, we're doing everything at 24-bit 96. We talked about doing it at 192, but they're actually still taping everything today at 96, and so they ultimately determined that let's just keep it 96, and so that was fine. It's almost 22 terabytes of audio total when we're done with this, which is far less than what the video project was. I'm using Pyramix with my Studer 827s, and this is a one-to-one workflow. So I'm listening to every single tape as I do them. This is one of those things where you really can't do a parallel digitization on, because we're syncing time code. There's lots of metadata being captured. So I get to listen to everything, essentially. And then with my conversion, I'm using the merging Horus stuff. We can do high sample rates. I can do several of these together. Some clients that we do stuff for, when we're doing tapes with like Dolby 8, for instance, we'll capture both the unencoded and the decoded version both at the same time, where everything just remains, it's obviously synced up together. And it's one of those, it gives us a lot of options. Of course, the timeline links units, those were pretty ubiquitous in recording studios. Those were the syncing units that I used for the actual timecode stuff. I'm just used to using them. They actually had Lynx 1 versions. They had micro Lynx versions of those, but the Lynx 2s, there's just something about them. I like using them. And then, of course, below that is the Dolby XP unit, which lets me do Dolby A and Dolby SR, and I can kind of hot swap those cards in and out of there. From a time code perspective, I won't spend too much on this, but there's a lot of bad information on the internet about how to sync tape properly, and I've been wanting to spend some time with this. I was going to do something for this at the AES thing in Culpeper coming up, but I just didn't have time. But essentially what I see a lot of, where people will resolve their DAW, Pro Tools, or whatever it is, to the tape machine. And what that will ultimately do is change your sample rate. Your capstan will never be going at the right speed. It's essentially changing your sample rate, so it's not a good capture. So what we do instead is, even though this looks complicated, it's actually not. We're feeding timecode to one Lynx unit. The tape machine is feeding timecode to another unit, and they essentially just talk to each other. And that way it tells the capstan how fast or how slow it should be going. And so you're always at a constant sample rate. You're getting the highest quality transfer, and it's really the right way of doing it. So I'm doing this for every single tape that I do. So it could be track sheets like this. There's shot lists or offline notes where Terry Lacona, the executive producer, would actually make notes. They would do whatever instrument was being played at the time. Any issues or like things that would happen live during the show, they would actually write the notes down, and it's really helpful. In addition to that, they also included stage plots, which were also very helpful. This kind of shows like what microphone they use, who was on stage. Sometimes there's like multiple guitar setups or drums or whatever it is, and trying to figure out what all that stuff is. It's actually helpful to have these diagrams. And then every once in a while, there's track sheets on Post-it notes. The Holiday Inn menus from the lobby. I mean, they just forgot the track sheets or something, and then they would just write it down on a napkin, and that was the track sheet. So a lot of these things were kind of done on the fly sometimes. Okay. And then there's more complicated ones like this. Tish Hinojosa, there was a lot of technical issues with this actual show, and they did an input list, and that was wrong. And then they hand wrote some stuff in, and then things went crazy in the show, and so they had to hand write more stuff. So most of the stuff is still actually technically wrong compared to what they recorded. So it's up to me to kind of go through and decipher all of this and figure out like what's right and what's wrong, and actually enter that in the metadata. And then some of the later seasons, they actually started rolling up the board tape from the actual board itself. They would roll up this tape, stick it inside the box, and so every once in a while I'll take these, if something's not clear, I'll take them and very carefully roll them out so I can see, okay, this is what their input list was. This is from a Joe Ely recording, which was also a lot of fun. And then these programs, these are in there, these are just fun. I mean, every once in a while there's some metadata that I can capture from these, but generally I can listen to music and just read the program, and it's pretty cool, some of the things that are in there. So I'm taking all this metadata, and essentially we're doing a couple things with it. We're capturing it precisely as it's written in the actual track sheets, and a lot of it is just like shorthand, and so it's not very comprehensive sometimes. Although he used the same nomenclature for a lot of different micings, instruments, and things like that. What we're essentially doing is we're taking it and I'm like normalizing it. So it kind of makes a little more sense in an archive situation to make it a little more searchable. There's some tracks where it's just like, vocal track, but it's also a fiddle and a piano and guitar and all this other stuff. So every single track and every tape that I listen to, if there's a tambourine playing, I'm notating that. So we will have literally every single instrument or person or whatever actually notated in the metadata, which is it's an incredible amount of work, but I just just typing as I'm listening to music, and it's actually kind of helpful to kind of figure out what's going on. And then we don't really have any like defined vocabulary around some of this stuff. I try to be we try to be too careful. We didn't really want to come up with like specific like steel guitar. Actually, one of them is like if it says piano, is it a grand piano? Is it a Yamaha DX7, which was used in a lot of the 80s episodes? Was a lid open or closed? I mean, all these things kind of like, we don't really have to capture this, but it's really helpful, particularly for the searchable database. I'm kind of a geek about organs, things like that. So is it a Moog? Is it a Vox Continental versus a Farfisa? Sometimes there's technical issues that come along with each of those instruments, and so I try my best to kind of capture it without really going overboard with it. But by the end of it, though, we'll know exactly how many times a cowbell has been used in Austin City Limits for the last 40 years, and that's pretty cool to be able to find that data. So yeah, so we're taking all that. We're bagging the files, we're creating the PB Core XML. We actually worked with WGBH to create the first multi-track record for the PB Core. And it was a little bit of work, it took a couple months to a little bit of trial and error to figure out how we should do this best. And so now all of this and our example records are actually on the PB Core website if you want to look at some of the stuff in depth. So now there's a standard, multi-track standard behind it, which is really cool. So that's it, y'all. That's all I have.